Punk, poet, extrovert, accountant, reformed mandarin, Joel is a cuddly teddy bear really. He lives in the wood of Hertfordshire with two boys and one wife. He writes fantasy with a sardonic but romantic vein, heavy on politics, neurodiversity, LGBTQ themes, and menace. He also writes poetry, science fiction, short stories, picture book script, with significantly less menace. And on today's episode of Auto Interview, it's my utmost pleasure and joy to have on the show today Joel Clover. How are you doing, Joel?
Good man, I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's such a pleasure to have you on the show today. I'm excited.
Well, as you already read out in my bio, like an
Yeah.
unusual beast in that I'm an extroverted accountant. If the much that I like that is not talking about myself, it is difficult to say what it is that I prefer to that. So
That's
eager to get on.
amazing. Yeah. So, Joel, I'd first love to say that you have such an interesting and captivating title, in the name of the path of pain and ruin. I'd love to ask you, how does this book come about? What inspired you to write The Path of Pain and Ruin?
Yeah. So this is how the story goes. Basically, I've always wanted to be a writer. I've always been a creative person, and
Mm.
I was working on a sort of young adult epic fantasy novel. I've been working on it for a while, and
Oh.
it's quite verbal and it's quite wordy and it's quite intricate. And the act that I'd been writing for quite a long time was the expository, quite slow section before the action explodes. Right, and
Mm.
I got stuck with it basically. And I've always got a couple of things on the go. I was always juggling something just to keep my mind fresh. And one day I sat down and I wrote the first page, first few lines of a new idea. And as I sat and sort of mulled and that's my process really. I tend to write a first page and sit, and
Yeah.
then I work out who the characters are, what I might want to try and say thematically, socially, linguistically with that first page, or where in my subconscious does that come from, and then I think about how I want to write it. And with Path of Pain and Ruin, I realized that a thing that I was lacking in my writing experience at that moment in time was
Mm.
that explosiveness, right? And I really wanted to write something that was quite high octane, quite adventurous, really, really punchy. Um, and the book's very influenced by, stylistically, somewhat by Brandon Sanderson, who's an enormously
Wow.
popular fantasy author, and he's got a
Yeah.
series called Mistborn,
Yeah.
where the magic and the action is really kinetic, and I wanted to write
Mm.
something quite kinetic. So I started to write it, and the first act flew onto the page, right? And I
Wow.
wrote the first chapter of the second act, and I knew what the ending was, and that's quite common for me as well. I tend to know what the start is and what the end is, and really at that point, I'm bridging between the two things, using the themes, my understanding of the character, to sort of weave a sort of natural path, somewhat plotted in my head, but to let it develop organically. Um, and so, as I say, I start writing the second chapter of this book, by which point I've got the religious component of this fantasy world, which is
Mm.
that the religion to which the main character subscribes believes that their god sets you a path that you must walk,
Mm.
and the path that you're walking, you can characterize it, you can experience it, understand it, and it's your job to sort of experience the world through that predestiny, but also that
Wow.
the main character is also struggling with this concept of predestiny, but also very traumatic past, and questioning basically, why have I had to suffer so much trauma, and why do I feel like only trauma awaits me in the future? Can I
Wow.
change and divert the path? So I have this book, as I say, and now I know that she is existing in this path of pain and ruin. That is all they experience,
Mm.
and that's what's going on. Yeah, and then I wrote the first chapter of the second act. Some of my better writing in terms of some of the lines and stuff in it, and it was an absolute catastrophe. It stalled the book for 12 months because it did not work, and I could not work out why.
Wow. It's
And so that's the story of the book. Basically, is that I realized, and like 12 months later, I eventually crack it. I went I do a lot of plotting when I'm exercising, so I'm plotting and running away thinking, I really like that story, but I can't, it doesn't work, it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And I suddenly realized that I've got completely the wrong antagonist. And that's why I thought I'd had this quite clever twist about antagonism and you know how that was driving this predestination. And I realized it was just complete nonsense. And I tore up 95% of that chapter, which was
Wow.
super painful. It's the first time I've really had to do that. And a few lines and a few bits of characterization appear later on in the book, things that I was particularly smug about, but nothing. Do you know what I mean? Nothing that would work as a whole chapter. And once I refreshed the antagonist, the book just came.
Wow. That's quite amazing. And I love the fact that you gave us this little background of the story. Sounds very intriguing to me. And while you were speaking, I was curious to ask, I don't know if it's a single novel or it's a series novel.
So it's a single novella. It's about 40,000 words. It's really quick.
Wow.
It is set in a fantasy world that I've created that I think has lots of potential and lots of purpose that I am going to use for other things. So
Wow.
I have a 10-page A4 document with different ideas that are there as single lines or single paragraphs.
Wow.
And as I write new ideas on that spins off and spawns these new first pages that generate new things. So there is a book that I've started working on, which is called Resurrection Inc., which is again about destiny and predestiny, and like other themes that I'm very interested in about family and found family, which will be set sort of like later in the same universe. But this novel, you can pick it up, you read the first line. Hopefully, this is the plan, right? You pick it up, you read the first line, you're thrown into it, you immediately want to know what's going on, and at the end of it, big explosive conclusion, bam, and you've got a whole story that you can walk away from and think, hopefully, that was cool, that was really fast, I loved it.
Wow. That's quite amazing to know, really. I love the sound of that. Now, I'm also going to ask you, for readers who haven't read the book yet, and of course, without giving much information away, could we have a sneak of what we'd expect picking up Art of Pain and Ruin?
Yeah. So I'll tell you what. Here's a suggestion. Would you permit me to read just that first few lines
Absolutely.
just to give you a feel for it?
Yeah, you can do that.
Okay. So he says, flicking to the first thing. So this is how it starts. First chapter is called Kindle, and one of the things about the book is that every chapter is named after it has a word which relates to fire. Fire is a very thematic component of the book, and the words have been very specifically chosen to give you a hint of foreshadowing as to what will come in the chapter. But sometimes that foreshadowing is deliberately misleading, and that's part of how I plotted the book. I sort of have used that sort of foreshadowing to help sort of weave through the narrative. So there's that. So you can look at the table of contents and the chapter titles and think, I wonder what that means. And there's these little clues in there. But so this is how it starts, and this is where the genesis of this idea comes from. He says, "You've been very naughty." His voice didn't fit him. Didn't fit his big fake chest or scarred face. Didn't fit with one red eye beyond bloodshot, more bled out. Didn't fit the knife in his hand, though that could have been because he'd picked it up off the table after he kicked in the door. He should have sounded like a foot breaking a branch or a noose snapping a neck, here, in this place. Not my house, not my home, but a home. Sheree's home. Sheree, who was trembling behind me. And I think, like, in terms of like giving you a feel for what the book is like.
Yeah.
I have a writing partner who is a screenwriter, and who's sold a couple of screenplays into Hollywood. And he says that the thing that characterizes my writing, other than like a very heavy Glenn Cook influence, if people like Glenn Cook, that's sort of what I'm going, is that it's a lot of quite short, quite crisp sentences. So not my house, not a home, not my home, but a home. So it's like 4, 5, 6 word sentences, click, 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 and then you'll have another longer sentence where just a sort of wider idea stretches out and pulls everything together. So that's, I guess, like if for people who haven't, like, if you go on the first page, that's it. And so the question that that I'm trying to pose in that first page is, who is, like, if it's not their home, why do they not feel at home in this place? And secondly, why has this monstrous individual kicked down their door, grabbed a knife, and what is it? What is their problem? More sort of generally, I would say this is it's dark. I'm not going to pull any punches. It's not sexually dark. It's not that sort of dark. But what it is it's very violent. I have been told, like, reviews have said that it is sort of Joe Abercrombie in sort of violence levels, who is quite a notoriously violent fantasy author. People have said it's grim and it's relentless, but part of that relentlessness is not just the scope and scale of the violence, but also the fact that it comes so quickly. Because of what I've tried to do in terms of the writing is, if you think to yourself, I'll just read a page. Well, the page may have, a fight or a piece of magic on it, but it will also have dozens and dozens of sentences that are written, hopefully in a way that you could read out loud if you were so inclined, and get into the next page in everything that I'm writing.
It's kind of amazing, really. I love the sound of your book. Sounds very intriguing to me. Now, Joel, there's a question that I always like asking authors that come on my show. And that's, I've always been fascinated about how authors, especially novelists like yourself, craft long sentences and brings works together in a way that it eventually makes a great novel. This always leaves me thinking about how exactly they got their ideas and inspiration. I'd also love to ask you, as far as writing is concerned, how do you get your inspirations and ideas? Where did they come from?
So I think with the novels that I write, and with the novels that I'm working on, so I have a second novel complete that I'm querying agents with at the moment, and I have a third that's about 65,000 words done. Right.
Wow.
So I've been pretty productive over the last couple of years. But where I get my inspiration from is quite interesting, in that, as I say, I write single page starters. I have so many, and I just come up with an idea. So, for instance, I'm working on a short at the moment.
Wow.
And I love a short story in terms of the crafting. I'm working on a short story at the moment, which may turn into a novella, but which is about it's about a hitman. But the thing that's sitting underneath it is that I had this idea about the way that the oil industry, and I was just sort of like sitting and musing and thinking about how the fact that oil is only really available in certain places in the world creates this sort of strange geopolitical pressures, and gives this, like, quite outsized influences to countries which don't occupy an enormous amount of space, don't have a huge amount of people living in them. And I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about the fact that that it creates a real tension, in certain countries, as I'm sure you know yourself. And I was thinking about, well, what else is there? Like, and I was thinking about all these other things, and this idea came to me. Okay, well, what if it wasn't oil? What if it was like genies and gin? That's quite like a classic, like a fantasy thing. Like, there's a Arab American writer called Saladin Ahmed, who is amazing, and his sort of reinterpretation of Arabic folklore and reinterpretations of that folklore have always been interesting to me. And I was like, well, you could do a really cool thing with, like, steampunk and genies instead of oil, and think about the politics and the geopolitics through that lens. And then you get thinking, okay, well, if you did that, what else might happen, right? And I think it's that, I'm very interested and very engaged in all sorts of topics, all sorts of areas. My brain works at 1,000,000 miles a minute, and I just think to myself, okay, what then? And sometimes, and don't get me wrong, I'm not ideas are necessarily great or revolutionary. There might be terrible ideas that I might never be able to execute. Hopefully they're good ideas that I can't execute, not terrible ideas. But I asked myself a few what if questions, and some sentences come out. I mentioned Resurrection Inc., another thing that I've started but has not progressed. But mainly hasn't progressed because this other thing that I'm writing just took on a life of its own. But I was in Kuala Lumpur. I was in the Batu Caves in Kuala Lumpur. This amazing temple complex, like Buddhist temple complex, that's inside caves on the top of a hill which is pretty hard to climb up. So by the time you get up to the top of this mountainous hill, as a Westerner, not accustomed to the climate, absolutely drenched in sweat, and and you go into this cave structure, and there's a full-size temple in there, enormous, like to my anglicized eyes, it's a cathedral that's been built in a cave on top of a mountain, and you just think to yourself, the commitment and the dedication to that act of faith by hundreds of people, must have been hundreds of people, like, and an investment of wealth. Like, why would you do it here? I mean, it's magnificent, but I mean, Kuala Lumpur is magnificent. You could build it somewhere flat, and it would have still been amazing. So then I'm like, okay, well, what would that look like? Because I love fantasy. I love science fiction. What would that look like in a fantasy setting, where, you know, gods and magic have a much more tangible, you know, touchable effect on human beings, and often I think I find in well-written fantasy, often you can use that as a sort of metaphorical thing, or a satirical thing, or a way of exploring cultural conditions in our world. And so, you know, I sit down and I'm like, okay, well, what if, and then suddenly I've got a page of a young woman climbing an impossible staircase to resurrect a dead god. And you think, okay, well, that's fun. That's a fun first page. What happens on page 2? And, you know, it comes back to what I was saying earlier. Like, I mean, I do generally know what will happen on the next page, but I want someone to think to themselves, what happens on the next page? This is interesting. What happens on the next page? But also to be talking about something that's real and relevant and human.
Yeah. Wow. That's quite amazing to know, really, Joel. You know, I love the sound of your books. They sound very interesting to me. And yeah, very captivating as well. So thank you so much for sharing.
You're welcome.
Now, apart from The Path of Pain and Ruin, do you have any other works you've authored or maybe currently working on?
Yeah, so I have a poem and a short that were both published in a magazine in the States, JA magazines. The link to those is on my Amazon authors page. I've got a bundle of shorts that I am submitting to various places, which I'm hoping to get picked up. I have a portfolio of children's picture book scripts which do not contain, you know, as we say in the bio earlier, like, there's not so much menace in the children's books. Like, there are no scenes in which anyone gets set on fire or beheaded, which I think is probably for the best when you're trying to write like stuff for early readers.
Okay.
And I've got a chapbook of poetry, which I'm developing at the moment, which is predominantly about the experience of being a parent. There's some political stuff in there, but again, you know, it is light on evisceration and beheadings. And so yeah, I've got quite a lot in the tank. I think it's, if I sat down and wrote a novel a year for every novel idea that I have on the pad at the moment, I probably wouldn't. I might just about finish them in my lifetime. And I add an idea or two a week, so I have like an inexhaustible supply of ideas, and things get refined, things get put away, brought back as I try and develop to be a better writer. Like, I think I'm all right. Like, you know, I'm not like, there are writers I could point out who I could like hold up, like working in the fantasy field right now, who I aspire to be and who I would hold out as being, you know, excellent examples, whether it's Nora Jemisin, who is amazing, or Hal Duncan, who is absolutely incredible. And, you know, writers who are definitely superior in the craft to me and are selling millions and millions of copies of books, and people that I've got particular love for KJ Parker and Mark Lawrence, who are both English writers who are, you know, capable of writing extraordinary things that are satirical and sarcastic, and also incredibly violent, which is what I want to write. But, you know, I'm climbing the mountain word by word, getting better and better every day, hopefully.
Beautiful.
And yeah, just trying to find people that want to read my stories and think I've got something interesting to say, and, you know, then they buy the book, they click 5 stars on Amazon, or 4 stars.
Wow.
You know? And then they send me an email and say they liked it. That's what I'm looking for. I mean, to be honest with you, if they buy the book, they can click 1 star on Amazon. That's fine. But the self-publishing on Amazon is not the way to make your fortune. You know, I'm under no illusions about that either.
Honestly, yeah. I love your take on these questions, really. This sounds very amazing to me. And now, you know, let's talk about challenges. Could you tell us, first of all, what publishing is like for a published author like yourself. Are there any challenges you've encountered ever since you got published? Also, how do you undo negative criticism as a writer?
So I published Path on Kindle. It has first challenge is always, and I think every author finds this, right? Regardless of whether you follow a traditional or independent publishing route, the moment
Yeah.
you crack open the thing you've published, that's when you find the error that has eluded you, right? So that is enormously frustrating. The big benefit of the fact that I've self-published ebook only format for a year is that when I found
Wow.
errors, I'm able to edit them before anyone emails me and tells me about them. So that's nice. Um,
Wow.
I think the real challenge for independent authors is finding an audience who are interested in you and who want to read you. You start off with friends, family, acquaintances, and you
Mm,
nag them. Even that, like I have friends who've published books who I supported enormously, and like I'm a big proponent of, who haven't got around to reading my book yet. You
mm.
know, if they listen to this podcast to this point, they'll know
Wow.
that I'm annoyed with them. But they already know that because I've texted them and told them. So that finding an audience, I think, for writers who are trying to step between, and so some authors love being independently published, love being self-published. You know,
Yeah.
I want to make that step towards traditional publishing, and it's a process in which there are gatekeepers, not in a negative way, but like you need to find an agent, right?
Mm,
In order, the agent helps you find the publisher. So first you have to write something that someone will be interested in, right? And even if you've done
mm,
that, you have to find the right person that's interested in it. Then they have to find another person that's interested in it in a publishing house, and then they have to sell it. And now that you can sell it yourself and try and find the audience for it, whether
yeah.
it's 5,000 people, 100,000 people, right? Whatever that is. But it is easier if someone is doing the marketing for you, and anyone
Mm,
you ever listen to, uh, you know, you have to be very adept, I think, at that sort of self-promotion, and you have to invest time in it. That,
absolutely.
if you're working, you've got children, I do occasionally have to go outside the house, that's all very difficult. So that's where I am at the moment. In terms of criticism, I hate being criticized. I'm very, very bad at it. But I recognize that as a fundamental flaw in my character. Because there's two
Wow.
types of people that criticize, I think, right? There's people who criticize and they're attempting to be helpful, right? Like if someone says to me, I like this, I didn't like this, right? And for this book, particularly the book we're talking about, Path of Pain and Ruin, a couple of people have said to me, it was well written, Joel, but it was too violent for me. I mean, I called
Mm,
it the Path of Pain and Ruin. It has a brass dipped skull covered in blood on the front cover, right? So
yeah.
I know that it is violent, and it is too violent for some people. A friend of mine said, "Oh, I'm just about to start reading it with my daughter," and I was like, "Isn't she 8?" And he was like, "Yeah," and I was like, "No, this is a terrible idea.
Wow.
Terrible. Like you read it, then decide if it's okay for her. But if you do, I'm going to judge you as a parent. So that's all
Wow.
fine." People saying to like any criticism of like, and those sorts of criticism, totally fine. If someone criticizes you just because they feel like being critical, I don't care about that.
Mm.
Like, and you know, if someone buys the book with the express intent of criticizing me, that's okay too because they bought the book. Like,
Yeah.
you need a certain amount of clicks on Amazon. Like, stick a one-star review in. If you've come across this wonderful podcast and you get to the end of it and think to yourself, "Wow, that guy is a self-indulgent egomaniac. I'm tired of his voice." Buy the book, click 1 star, say it at the bottom because it will still help me. I'm
Yeah.
okay with um, and as I've said, I think probably 3 or 4 times by this point because I do repeat myself, and I apologise for that. Like, I know I'm not the best writer in the world. I'm trying to be a good writer.
Yeah.
I wouldn't even say I was a great writer. I'm trying to be a good writer who writes entertaining things.
Yeah.
If tomorrow I'm a better writer who writes more entertaining things, and that is a result of feedback or criticism, then
Mm. Wow.
that person's helped me. Whether they meant to help me or not, that person's helped
Yeah.
me.
Absolutely. Wow, that's quite amazing, really. I love your answers to these questions. And I need to say that you're quite educative as well. Thank you for sharing. Now, Joel, is there anything that you'd love to share with the viewers about your books that we did not mention in this interview and you'd love the viewers to know?
I think so. The key thing is the book is called The Path of Pain and Ruin by Joel Glover. It is available on Amazon. It is Kindle format only. The paperback format launches this month, subject to proofs. So if you're an e-reader, you can get it now. It's free on Kindle Unlimited. And weirdly, if you are reading an author's book on Kindle and it is available on Kindle Unlimited and the sale price is less than £2, they are making more money if you read it on Kindle Unlimited. I do not know how the economics of it work, but that's how it is. Right?
Yeah,
I don't mind. I've done free promotions. I have done, like, the book is £1 and it's about £1 in other denominations around the world. There are people all over the world, according to my stats, who have downloaded the book. I would love for people to try it. If you do try it, please put a score into Amazon or Goodreads for it. Almost regardless of what the score is, it will help in some way. If you have thoughts or feedback on whether you enjoyed it, that's brilliant. If you do enjoy it, tell everybody you know to buy it. That would be amazing. If you hate it, I joke at the end of the book, in the end matter, I'm like, if you hate it, you keep it to yourself. But do you know what? If you hate it, my email address is in the book. Email me and tell me why. At the very worst, I'll print it out and read it out at Christmas Day. I'll entertain my family. Other than that, I want everybody to look after themselves. It's a world's a scary place at the moment. Nothing but love for everybody. And I hope you're all well and keeping well in the new year.
Yeah. And please, before we go, I'd love you to show the book to the camera. I know you don't have a physical copy there that you can just show so we see what it looks like.
Yeah. So this is my baby. The Path of
Such
Pain
an
and Ruin.
amazing cover.
Yeah, so the cover was done by my writing group partner, Dean, who is a polymath, wonderfully talented man in all sorts of spaces. And he agreed to do the cover for me for the price of one hot chocolate, which I thought was very reasonable. And he'd read about a third of the book. And he was like, I'm into it enough that I can do the cover. I'll carry on reading it. And he sent me the cover, and I said to him, I know which page you're on, Dean. And he was like, yeah, I read that. And I was like, that's the cover. So there's, I know there's this old expression, right? You should never judge a book by its cover. But that obviously comes from a time when there was no art on the covers of books. You can absolutely judge this book by its cover.
Its cover.
There is shadowing behind the lettering. There is blood spattered leather and a bronze dipped skull. And that should set you up for knowing that this is a book about, it's a book about ancient empire and the ancient world. It's very heavily influenced by Brandon Sanderson and Miles Cameron, and get into it.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And I left a link in the description part of this interview where interested viewers can get a copy of Joy Glover's books directly on Amazon. So thank you so much, Joel, for accepting the invitation to be featured on P English Literature. It's awesome having this conversation with you.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I hope the channel goes really well. I hope the channel continues to grow. Leave comments in the description. Click like and subscribe. You know what to do. And I'd love to hear from anyone who's got any thoughts. And hopefully, as I say, in the future, you will see my book in stores and you will see my poetry on the internet. And if it turns into a Netflix series, I suppose I'll have to cover that too.
Yeah, that would be great, really. Yeah, thank you so much. That was quite fun.